There was much talk about how magnanimous and generous the offers were. You can't find a map. I don't think a single map appeared in the American media. They were available. They were in the Israeli media and Europe, standard scholarly sources and so on, but they didn't appear. If you look at the map, you can understand exactly why the settlement was completely unacceptable to the Palestinians. It broke the West Bank into effectively 4 virtually separated cantons, north, central, and southern, with a little part of East Jerusalem, the center of Palestinian commercial and industrial and cultural life, separated from the 3 virtually. A few connections, but difficult ones. And that program that's a settlement program that was conscious, continued rapidly under Clinton and Barack. It's continuing even more under Sharon and Bush. And it is undermining the possibility of a meaningful political settlement. If you ask what the future ought to be, in my opinion, here I happen to agree with about 2/3 of the population of the United States, according to polls, and almost the entire world. There has to be a preliminary settlement on approximately the international border. It's the pre-June '67 border, with some adjustments because of changes since, but mutual adjustments. Actually, Clinton's chief negotiator, Robert Malley, discussed this in Foreign Affairs, the main establishment journal, and he said what makes sense, I think, that there have to be effectively 1-to-1 land swaps, which would be the basis for at least a political settlement that would lay the basis for an end to violence, integration of a peaceful integration of Israel into the region as its leading industrial and financial center, but just part of it, without further conflict. If that stage can be reached, and there is an overwhelming international consensus on that, and strong popular support in the United States, the U.S. has been blocking that for 25 years. It's part of the illusions that are talked about in the title of that book. If we can get to that stage, then the further questions you're raising come up. How about, there will be serious problems of democratization, both in Israel and in the new Palestinian state. My own feeling remains pretty conservative. It's what it was 60 years ago, that the long-term, I don't think it makes much sense to break that territory into 2 parts. If you know the area at all or have traveled there, you can see it's awfully artificial and harmful. In the longer term, I think there should be moved towards some kind of federal structure, ultimately as relations, let's hope, improve among the people and nationalist sentiments subside and hatred subside, moves towards closer integration as circumstances permit.
We're at about the halfway point with our in-depth with Noam Chomsky. He is a professor at MIT in Cambridge. Here's a look at the outside of his office building where he works, and eventually you'll see where his office is inside. How much time do you spend there?
Usually 3 full days a week.
What days?
Well, for some reason, my classes for many years have been on Thursdays. So Thursdays classes, Tuesdays and Fridays appointments, interviews, other things.
How many classes a year or different courses a year do you teach?
Well, technically I've been retired for the last couple of years, but this year I had 2 courses at MIT and a half course at another university, State University of New York.
How much are you speaking?
I can't even remember. Almost constantly.
I mean, do you go on the road a lot still?
Quite a lot. I arrange the timing so that I can be on the road, obviously, on days when I don't have commitments at work. A fair amount, yeah.
I want to take a number of calls. If you don't mind, make some notes here so we can hear some voices of people that are watching. And we'll go through a couple of these here, and then we'll come back to and have you wrap up some of the comments on their calls. New York City next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi, Dr. Chomsky. A couple of things, and I'll try to make this quick, but a couple of the challenges that you pointed out, the United States being only superpower and having a much larger role and responsibility in the global community. Some of the changes that need to happen, and going back to the earlier caller's points on sort of socialistic philosophy, I mean, the good for the all is the way I would look at that. It seems to almost oppose the foundation of the United States being more of a capitalistic system where it is profit-driven, and maybe I'm drawing too big of assumptions, but it seems like we're more in a plutocracy than a democracy, and a lot of the people who are in a position to make those changes on behalf of the United States also have special interests in their ears from the industrial society, or that's probably propagating a lot of the industrial feudalism, as you've mentioned, and thereby also creating some of the frustration, the antagonism, and resentment against the United States, resulting in terrorism, as we've seen it. So how do you see something like this changing when you've got sort of a disinterested public, or a public that's kind of being kept out of the whole process, and about to be even more so with further media consolidations? So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Let me go to Fall River, Massachusetts. What your question or comment?
Yeah, Professor Chomsky, you had already answered my question. But it seems to me you're really holding Israel to a double standard. You say nothing of the fact that no Jews can live in Saudi Arabia or Jordan, but you hold Israel to such a standard. And also, Jewish people cannot visit the Temple Mount. And but when Jews control religious areas, they're supposed to make it available for everybody. So could you address that? Why do you hold Israel to a double standard?
Thanks. Denver, Colorado, what do you have to say today?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to thank you very much for having Noam Chomsky on the show. This is a great honor, and one of the most important writers in history. But I just want to present a hypothesis, and I would like him to address this. Do you think the recent Sharon move to refer to the O word, as people say, and what appears to be all roads leading to Tehran, as far as military action, do you think the Bantustan, you'll see the point I'm making, do you think the Bantustan model prevailed in Israel? And do you think this was an effort to sort of neutralize the Arab opposition? Because I think it appears to me that the inevitable move for military action will be against Iran, probably within the next year or so.
One last one, and then we'll come back to Dr. Chomsky. We go to Palo Alto, California.
Good morning, Professor Chomsky, or I guess it's afternoon where you are.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions about 9/11, about the terrorists. The terrorists somehow prevented the U.S. Air Force jet fighters from being scrambled in the normal 10 minutes, and they caused a delay of 75 minutes for the jet fighters to be sent up. And they hit the Pentagon with a guided missile because if it had been one of those airliners, there would have been about 100,000 pounds of aluminum out on the lawn there, and that could not possibly have vaporized the way the government said it did. And somehow the terrorists arranged those cell phone calls, and that's been shown by experiment to be impossible. And somehow those terrorists put explosives in the World Trade Center buildings because Columbia University seismographs showed pulses that could only have been caused by explosives at the beginning of the fall of each of those buildings, not as they were actually falling. Now, all of these things, you can read them, for example, at cosmicpenguin.com. That has links to 55 different websites containing information about these facts.
All right, sir, thanks. There's a lot there, but maybe you can summarize some of it.
Okay. Maybe the easiest way is to go backwards. That's okay, yeah. Well, the last caller made a number of technical observations, which I'm completely incompetent to comment on. I have no idea whether there were seismographs that showed that there were explosives in the building, and frankly, I'm extremely skeptical. The fact that a lot of material appears on internet sites is not very compelling. The internet is a very valuable instrument. You can learn all sorts of things from it, but anybody can put anything they like up on the internet. That's part of its value, and you have to evaluate the information. I haven't checked any of the technical issues that you discussed, so I can't comment on them, but I should say that I have extreme skepticism about them. On Sharon, Iran, the caller right before, Sharon, the O word, namely occupied territories. Actually, the word he used is conquered territories, which is pretty strong and accurate. And the road to Tehran and the efforts to neutralize the Arab world. Here, I think we have to be we have to look closely. The Sharon plan and the Bush plan, as far as we have any information about them, is simply a continuation of the Bantustanization process. If you read the Israeli press, which has excellent reporters like Amir Haas and Gidon Levy, who write about this all the time, what they're describing and what you see if you go to the West Bank is just breaking it up into cantons. I mean, the separation wall, which is going from north to south, has already encircled a Palestinian town, Qalqilia, and is virtually destroying it. It was just announced that it's going to go to the east, to settlements to the east, Ariel and Emmanuel. There's a story in the New York Times today about the settlement of Itamar, which is even to the east of that. Whether that'll be included in the separation wall or not, we don't know, but it's a salient, which was in the Clinton-Barak plan that basically cuts the northern sector from the rest. There is just no doubt that the separation wall or some equivalent will include the vast settlement and infrastructure programs to the east of Jerusalem, extending almost to Jericho, which cuts it again. And those there's a growing city there, Ma'ale Adumim, which was established primarily in the Clinton-Barak period, pretty much with the purpose of bisecting the West Bank. And it's got infrastructure connections to Israel, which essentially break up the Palestinian territories. That plan, as far as we know, George Bush's vision, as he calls it, as far as we know anything about it, is simply a kind of program which is called a Bantustanization program in Israel for good reasons.
Would you say that word again?
Bantustanization. I mean,
it stands for?
That's a reference to the South African programs of the early 1960s of setting up black homelands, which were called Bantustans. Transkei was the first. There were several others. They were never recognized by anyone, but their idea was to set up black states under black leadership, surrounded by white areas. And it was one of the most grotesque efforts of the apartheid regime in its worst period. That's been regarded as a model by Israeli planners pretty openly. And it's discussed in those terms, criticized in those terms usually. But it's not unreasonable. I mean, it's a cantonization program, setting up cantons which have some connection, but not much, and are basically unviable. Is that an effort to neutralize the Arab world? Yeah, I think your suspicion is correct, but it's certainly not going to work if it's anything like that program. As for Iran being the next step, it's certainly being set up. And there's, unfortunately, the United States is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, it's very likely that the war in Iraq will inspire Iran to develop weapons of mass destruction. In fact, that's been predicted by intelligence agencies and analysts all over the world, including the United States, that this plan, the national security strategy, the plan to crush by force any potential challenge to U.S. domination, is virtually demanding that potential adversaries create some kind of a deterrent. And the only kind of a deterrent they have to a state with overwhelming power is either terror, which is a deterrent, or weapons of mass destruction, or, as in the case of North Korea, massed artillery aimed at Seoul and at American forces there, which are a deterrent to attack on North Korea. But you know, when you announce your intention to rule the world by force and to crush any potential challenge, you're virtually, demanding that potential adversaries do something about it. And Iran might move on to develop weapons of mass destruction, which will then be used as a pretext for an attack. However, I personally don't think there's going to be an attack on Iran.